Loved ones, this is a joint presentation because for my students in Principles of Management, this is session 24. It's a PowerPoint presentation on leadership. And for those of you in Intermediate Entrepreneurship, 4234, this is session 29 for you. So this presentation is accelerated, but I will be leaving it up on YouTube until the end of the semester. So I'm going to, on a pretty regular basis, step away from the front of the camera so that you can see the video screen in its entirety. And I just want to begin. This particular presentation is meant to be an overview of leadership as a domain, and I hope that you find it to be beneficial. It's my work product, it's not something that came out of an instructor's resource. So when I was developing this presentation, I entitled it Leadership, Art and Science. And I did that for a reason. And if we were together, I would ask you, I wouldn't beat it out of you, but I would ask you, and you would contribute. You would tell me why I chose to name this Leadership, Art and Science. The reality is, and this won't surprise anybody, big parts of leadership are science. They're understood, they are theoretically based, we've empirically tested it and validated the theory. It's transferable, we can teach it, we can measure it. So big parts of leadership indeed are science, but big parts of leadership are art. They reside in each of us individually. Things like authenticity and trust and leadership style and things that are profoundly important. So I know it's lame, I know it's goofy, but it's a legitimate title. Leadership has big parts of art and big parts of science. I don't have any sort of a clicker, so I've got to walk to the keyboard and use the controls there, which is no big deal. So, excuse me. You've been with me for a while, you know my penchant for definitions. We can't have a beauty contest without defining beauty. So, if I turned you loose, if I said, y'all jump on Google Scholar, come up with a definition of leadership, I promise you in 9/10 of a second, you'd have 4.9 million definitions. And many of them would have substance. But the dilemma with most definitions of leadership, in my view, is that they're incomplete. They'll talk about the relationship between the leader and the collaborators and that sort of thing. So I want to go to the work of a man named Gary Uckel, very, very bright leadership scholar. This was out of some work that he published in 2006. And he defines leadership as a process in which an individual intentionally influences a group of collaborators to accomplish some group task. So Uckel's definition of leadership has three pieces in it, doesn't it? It has the team lead. That would be the individual who intentionally exerts influence. The collaborators, those are the people in the group, the people on whom she or he exerts the influence. And together, they do something, some group task, group activity were the words that he chose in his 2006 definition. So the reason I want to share that with you is it's complete, it's simple, it's robust. I promise you, in 50 years, that will still be a competent definition of leadership. It's a process in which an individual intentionally influences a group of collaborators to accomplish a group task. Powerful, simple, durable. Hard to beat that. So, excuse me, please. You are uncommonly bright people, in part because you're here in the Parker College of Business. You're not in the College of Arts and Crafts or wasting your life in other ways like that. So you have a keen sense that there's a legitimate difference between leaders and managers, but many people on the other side of those doors don't. They think those terms are interchangeable. They are most assuredly not interchangeable. So a man named John Cotter, about 30 years ago, published an article in the Harvard Business Review, and he talked, the title of the article was What Leaders Really Do. Well, it was a simple article. It was only 10 or 11 pages long. It was all textual. There were no data or charts or analytics or anything like that. And in the article, he made a very simple but useful distinction between leaders and managers. This is Cotter's work. He argues that managers cope with complexity so they organize. If you're in a managerial role, you're going to have some sort of control or dominion over people and processes and information and stuff and products. You have to take all of these messy things and you have to make them routine and standardized and efficient. So what managers deal with is they deal with complexity, and for that reason they organize. Leaders alternatively cope with change, and for that reason they inspire or they motivate. Now, Cotter goes on to say that a balance between leadership and management is essential for all organizations. No one in his or her right mind would say, oh, you've got to have all leadership or all management. There needs to be a balance. Precisely because they do different things. I want you to think about something, and all I'm doing right now is provoking you. I just want you to think about this. If leaders and managers do different things, if managers organize and leaders inspire, if they do different tasks, to do them well would take different skills. And what that suggests is that it'd be quite rare to find someone who's at the same moment in time as both a good leader and a good manager. I'm not saying it can't happen, but it would be rare because they do different things, and to do them well requires different skills, different competencies. Now, one thing that I would almost predict in your lives, when I say your lives, I mean your organizational lives. My expectation is most of you, I mean, you may go down different paths and I get that, but most of you, if you join an organization, very quickly will be in some relatively frontline managerial role. When I say frontline, I mean you will be directly interacting with people in your team. You'd probably be directly interacting with others, customers, vendors, whatever the case may be. But when I say frontline manager, that's what I mean. I mean regular direct interactions with people over whom you have responsibilities. Now, the significance of that is you start off in a managerial role, and what I would expect, I would even predict this, is that your lives, this bouncing back and forth between leadership and management, will be episodic. You'll be in a managerial role for a while, and then your boss will select you for a leadership role, and you'll carry out those responsibilities uncommonly well, and then you may revert. You may go back to the same managerial role, or you may move to a different one, or you may even change organizations. But I've watched this for my entire life. I've experienced it to a lesser degree. It's quite rare for someone simultaneously at the same time to be a good leader and a good manager. But it's quite common for people to perform well in a managerial role, be put in a leadership role, and sometimes they flourish and sometimes they struggle, and then they go to another managerial role. So I would expect that this relationship between leadership and management would be episodic. There would be different episodes in your life where you take on different responsibilities. But that's just me adding my perception to what John Cotter has to say. Again, I love what he says because it characterizes those two disciplines quite well. So, he goes on to say, this is in the same article, he talks about the process of leadership. And I'll remind you that that's how Yuval started his definition. He said leadership is defined as a process in which an individual intentionally influences others to accomplish a group task. So leadership is a process. It's how we do something. It's not what we do. And Cotter says that his view is you can take this process and you can discretely break it into three component pieces. And his argument is it has to be linear. First one, then the second, then the third. So let me start with this thing that he calls setting direction. He says in this article, really well done article, he says the first thing a leader has to do is she or he has to articulate a vision and then develop a set of strategies. So visions, if you talk to people about visions, the conversation will often devolve into things that are mystical, or they'll be talking about hallucinogenic drugs or something stupid. In the leadership literature, a vision is nothing other than a desirable future state. If you are entrepreneurial and you want to start a business, your vision is whatever it is you want to accomplish, whatever you want to achieve. I think I have a good example of vision strategies by using the Dell companies. Michael Dell started the Dell companies in the early 80s. I think it might have been 1983. He was a 19-year-old dropout college student living in Plano, Texas. Plano is a suburb on the north side of Dallas. And Michael, at that age, at the age of 19, articulated a vision. He said, I want to create a company that becomes the dominant firm in the personal computer industry. My goodness, for 35 years he did just that. And he took on giants. When he launched that business in '83, he had enormous, formidable competitors. Compaq, IBM, lots of Asian companies. So this man was fighting giants. But his vision, this desirable future state, was simply to build a company that became the dominant firm in the PC industry. And he did, for 35 years. So then, his strategies are so simple. Most people think that this is complex or arduous. Not always the case. The Dell companies always, for the entire history that the company existed, the Dell companies followed two strategies. The first was, at least that I would comment, is Dell was always a direct seller. If you wanted a Dell machine, you either called and went online, you specified or configured your machine as you wanted, they would assemble it, ship it, you'd have it in a few days. Dell did not sell through Walmart or CompUSA or Best Buys or H.H. Gregg. Dell was a direct seller. Now, the reason for being a direct seller is multifaceted. The first is, if Dell is a direct seller, it captures all the gross profit. If Dell has a really high quality laptop that it sells for $1,200, I'm making up an example. Let's assume it has a high quality laptop that it sells for $1,200 and its product costs are $600. So the gross profit, the difference between costs and the revenue piece, is $600. So if Dell is a direct seller, it captures the entire gross profit. If Dell sold through resellers, through CompUSA or Best Buy or anybody, it would have to share that gross profit with a reseller. But we get that. So Dell's decision to be a direct seller was smart. There were other things too. There's no obsolescence. If machines sit in inventory somewhere, they decline in value. I have a friend who pointed out once that a personal computer has roughly the same economic life as an ice cream cone. As soon as you serve the cone, it starts to melt. And the same is true of computers, because almost on a weekly basis, the new machines that are being produced would have more storage, faster clock speeds, or some other features that you and I value. So the discounter would have to literally, the reseller would have to discount the purchase price of the machine or they wouldn't sell them. And they're going to expect the company, they're going to expect Dell to support that, to absorb that discount. So Dell didn't have to deal with obsolescence if it sold directly. So a lot of virtue to being a direct seller. The other thing that Dell did, and it only followed two strategies, and that's a big deal. The other thing was that Dell, for its entire corporate history, outsourced 100% of its production. Dell has sold hundreds of millions of computers, never manufactured one. It'll give its production schedule to AMD and to Intel and say, y'all, we need these chips on these dates. For years, it would get its monitors from Sony, because like the Trinitron. It used US Robotics for internal modems. It would use other vendors for the aluminum chassis and for peripherals like keyboards and cables. Dell never manufactured a single machine. So, Dell created this entire constellation of strategic alliances. Dell was in the middle, and all of these other companies were developing parts and shipping them to Dell. And Dell assembled the components and then sold the machine. Now, goofy question, if Dell does no manufacturing, how many billions of dollars do they have to spend on production and factories and things like that? Zero. If Dell outsources 100% of the production function, how much money does Dell have to spend on research and development? Same answer, zero. So Dell simplified its life, it simplified its capital needs, it pushed out all the R&D and all the production to its industry partners. And they benefited because they got huge contracts, didn't they? And Dell benefited because it got a reliable flow of component parts that it could assemble. So Dell's only two strategies. We get to this part of Connor's work when he says you articulate a vision, and And then you develop strategies that get you from here, the present state, to there, the desirable future state. That's what the strategies do. They'll have two. We're going to be direct sellers. We're going to outsource all production. Not complex, is it? So now I want to go to the second piece. This is Cotter's work from this 30-year-old article in HBR. He says the second thing that leaders do in this process is that they align people. Now, there are two words in the stem of this sentence that begin with C's, communication and commitment. I am convinced that to be an effective leader, you and I have to be good communicators. We don't have to be gifted public speakers. We don't have to have oratorical skills. We don't need to be fancy, uptown, any of that stuff. We have to simply be able to communicate effectively. We have to be able to, if I'm the leader, I need to be able to give you a message that's authentic and understandable. That's it. We need to be able to communicate effectively. Now, Cotter's argument is if a leader can communicate the vision and the strategies, then what that leader will do is that leader will build commitment. Now, in the organizational sciences, commitment has a special meaning. Like many words in the English language, it has multiple definitions. But in the organizational sciences and business, commitment means two things. It means that if you're an employee and you exhibit commitment, the first thing that's true is you intend to stay with that organization on a long-term basis and make a contribution. You're not job hopping, resume building, things like that. If you are committed, you join an organization to stay and contribute. I would hope that that describes me here at Summit. That's certainly my intention, is to stay and contribute on a long-term basis. I could move anywhere in the nation tomorrow and have plus 35 or plus 40 on my salary, but I'm not going to do it. I made a choice and I'm here. Now the other part of commitment, the other part of this definition that's specialized for the organizational sciences is that you are willing to subordinate self to the goals of this organization. You and I know people who are so selfish, so self-absorbed that it's sad. What's in it for me? And if they can't immediately discern something, they punch out. Well, if you exhibit commitment, you're willing to subordinate self. That means that you'll take on responsibilities that are uncomfortable. You might work a few extra hours, whatever the case may be. But commitment in an organizational context means that you're willing to subordinate self for the good of the organization. Whatever this could be, a small group, could be a big organization. And it means that your intention is to stay here long term and make a contribution. So think about what Cotter says. You have to be an effective communicator to deliver this message. What's the vision? What are my strategies? And if you can do that, if you can authentically, effectively communicate that message, you will build commitment. Now, I want you to think about this. Would you like to be in a team where everybody is committed? Everybody actually cares, they're going to stay, they're going to contribute, they'll subordinate self. Or would you want to be in a team that rebels, or a team that just simply complies to minimum effort? I know precisely where I want to be. And I actually have been in situations where everyone did exhibit commitment, but there haven't been many of them. Now this last thing that Cotter talks about is he says, the third thing that a leader does, this process of leadership, is to motivate and inspire people. And all I've done is just grab the verb energize and stuck it in here. So if this stood alone, if Cotter didn't develop it more in the article, it would be lame. That's like you coming to me and saying, Dr. Norton, can you give me some insights on how I could be successful in business? And I say, yeah, be lucky. I've told you nothing. You should shoot me repeatedly and then reload and shoot some more. So when Cotter says motivate and inspire, he actually presents some things in the text of the article, and that's the next transparency in this slide there. So, when Cotter presents this in the article, he identifies four techniques that you can use to motivate people. And he says in the article, he said, this is neither exhaustive, nor is it sequential. You don't have to do this in this order. These are four examples of things that you can do to motivate people if you're in a leadership role. The first thing he says is you have to articulate the vision in ways that engage followers. In my view, that just reinforces what I said a few moments ago about being an authentic communicator. If I gift wrap things, if I spin them, if I give you half-truths, pieces of the puzzle, you're going to think, this guy's a piece of poop. And you're not going to trust me or follow me. It's not difficult to discern someone who's being inauthentic, is it? But if you say, gee, I don't know, or here's the goal, we'll have to work hard to get there, all I'm saying, all Cotter is saying, is that you have to engage, articulate the vision in ways that engage followers. Don't threaten people, don't make promises you can't keep, but you have to simply be an authentic communicator. That is so easy. How tough is it be for you to be authentic? Not difficult at all. This next thing he talks about, he says that there's shared control over process and content. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I was a late-term grad student before I knew the difference between process and content. Process is how we do things, and content is what we do. So, let me give you an example that comes from my experiences in the military about shared control over process. In my military training, I don't recall anything specific about collaborative decision making or reaching out and getting other people's perspectives. But when I took command of Fox Force, the reconnaissance platoon that I led, I literally took command on 25 December 1969. And assuming that leadership role was the second best Christmas present I've ever received. And I said to my guys, among other things, that on a regular basis I will reach out to you. I was joining a group of seasoned, experienced, incredibly capable warriors. And I had a little bit of time in the bush, but not as much as they had. I didn't have their level of experience, their level of expertise. I didn't have their insights. Every single time that we had a mission, I would go to my guys and say, here's the task, here's what I want to do, what are your thoughts? Critique it. Tell me if you think it's smart or silly or stupid or whatever. And in some cases, they would say, we're on board 6, we think that's a good call. Or they would say, with no hesitation, that's dumber than a rock, here's why. And they would tell me what I missed. Now the point is, the reason that this thing about sharing control over process and content, put yourself in any group setting. If your boss, team lead, whatever, reaches out to you and asks for your perspective, that's motivational because you realize that you are valued, you are regarded as a contributing member of this team. Whatever you have to say, I want to hear. That lifts people up because it's authentic. The other thing that's true, and this is a secondary benefit, is if you do this sort of shared control over process, over how we do things, the decision quality tends to be much better. Any decision you and I make together will be vastly better than any decision I make alone, because I benefit from your experience, your skills, your expertise. So there's a lot to be said about this shared control over how we do things or what we do. A lot to be said about that. Shared control. You're not important. Now, the third thing, leaders develop followers professionally and personally. That can take so many different forms. I want you to think about this. If I were in a team lead role and you worked with me and for me, and I saw you as promising, I thought you had some real potential, I promise you, I'm going to delegate tasks to you. I'm going to tell you what I want done, I'm going to make sure you have adequate resources, and then I'm going to say to you, I'll be here if you need me, but I'm not going to hover, I'm not going to micromanage. So my point is, if I delegate a task to you and give you adequate resources, then what I'm doing is I'm developing you, because leadership is a contact sport. You have to immerse yourself in it to get good at it, because when you practice leadership, you'll discover things that you do uncommonly well, and you'll discover places where you struggle. Leadership requires immersion. You have to do it. You can't just read about it or study it. So the point is, if I delegate stuff to you, that's a way of me purposefully developing you. I'm putting you in a situation where you can grow, you can sharpen the saw, you can get better skills. That's powerful stuff. And that's just one example. And then this last one he talks about is leaders recognize and reward achievement. And what he makes explicit in his article is this is an intrinsic model. Extrinsic rewards have an identifiable economic value. If I said to you, gosh, you did a crazy good job last year, here's a $15,000 bonus and a new car. Both of those rewards are extrinsic because they have a definable value, an economic value. But here's an example of rewarding achievement intrinsically. What if we're on the same team, you and I happen to be in the team lead role, and I come to you and I say, I am so pleased with what you do. Your contribution is just stunning. We simply could not do what we do without you, without your contribution. Is there any way that I could reward you for that? Because sadly, I have no money to give you. So I'm role playing. I'm using this as an example. What if you said to me, boss, there's something on my heart. I'd like to learn more about it because I think that I can embed it in our business, new product, new process, whatever the case may be. And I say, thank you, Lord. Got you. I've got that opportunity to reward you. So what I will probably do is I'll probably say, all right, I'm going to give you 6 or 8 hours a week. Let's say 8 to make this simple on me. I'm going to give you 8 hours a week to work on that project. I want you to study it, gather data, find out what's out there, report back to me in a month or 6 weeks or whatever's reasonable. So I am setting aside 1 workday a week, 1/20th of your compensated time, for you to work on something that energizes you. So in a month or 6 weeks, you might come back to me. You might say, Bill, this idea I had is a bust. The space is already crowded. People have great stuff out there. I just don't think the opportunity existed the way I thought. Similarly, you could say, oh, this is really promising. I can't find anything that does precisely what I would like to do with this new product. And I will say, hallelujah, let's continue. Let's get pushing this big rock uphill. So now we're at phase 2. And I'm going to say, okay, the release time continues. You still get a day a week, but now I want you to wrap a team around it. You pick 4 or 5 people, high speed, talented, people with whom you're compatible. And again, I don't know if it's 6 weeks, 8 months, 8 weeks, whatever the case may be. We'll pick a time that's reasonable, and then you and your team will report back to me, not just what you found, but what your recommendations are. You might say, boss, this is so easy. We can modify a product that we already have to add these features, and that will differentiate us from everybody else in this industry group. And we should be able to just, with that simple modification, roll out a dramatically improved product that should get us much better market share. Sweet. You've studied this challenge, you've come back with a recommendation, or maybe multiple recommendations. But the point is, what I'm doing is I'm rewarding you intrinsically. I'm giving you an opportunity to work on something that you like. Now again, we may never take this to market, or we might, I don't know. And there are plenty of other ways to do it. But I just wanted to take the 4 techniques that Cotter talks about in this article and give you sort of working examples. And again, he says that this is not linear. It's not A, then B, then C, then D. This is because each of us often responds to different sort of motivational techniques. And it's also not exhaustive. This is not every possible technique you could use. Now, subordinate leadership. The first line on this slide says leadership is not restricted to the CEO. If you read the press, even the business press, even Barron's or Wall Street Journal or whatever, you'll be left with the impression that the only leadership that takes place in any organization is at the top. That is just a pile of poop. That's the stupidest thing I can't even imagine. Jack Welch was credited with doing remarkable things in his 20-year run as CEO at General Electric, and I credit him for the things he did. But Jack Welch was at the top of an organization that had 160,000 people making good decisions every single day. So my point is, successful organizations cultivate leadership at every level in the hierarchy. They push it down to the lowest levels, and they push it laterally so that every unit is positively impacted. Great organizations cultivate leadership everywhere. And I'll talk about leadership development programs in a minute. But what I want to do right now is I want to talk to you about Hal Moore's 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry as a model of subordinate leadership. And what I'm going to do is, just for a moment, I'm going to power down the projector, because I want to put something on the whiteboard. And you'll have a pretty good sense when I finish about what Hal Moore is doing. So, I'm going to start this part of the presentation by putting a date on the board. The date is 25 June 1876. There was a significant event in American military history on that day, 25 June 1876. Who can tell me what happened? Oh dear, that's what I figured. I'm talking to myself. So let me put a schematic on the board. All right, this squiggly line on the whiteboard is meant to represent the Little Bighorn River. The part that we're going to talk about today runs through Montana. It runs through multiple states. But this squiggly line is a Little Bighorn River, and that arrow just says that that's the orientation to north. Now, I put two ovals on the board. The one down here at the 4 o'clock position is meant to be George Custer's staging area, and the one on the basically at 10 o'clock northwest is meant to be an Indian encampment. So here's what happened. This was the date of what we call Custer's last stand. Now, the history is really pretty well developed on this. George Armstrong Custer served with Phil Sheridan's cavalry in the Shenandoah Valley in the Civil War, and he was a career soldier, and he was posted out west. I forgot what fort he was stationed at. But this was immediately after the Civil War when we started that unforgivable action that the American government took to take Indians off of their native lands and put them on reservations. We've done some horrible things as a nation. The fact that we condoned slavery, the fact that we forced Indians to live on reservations, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. We made some really boneheaded decisions. So, Custer is posted at a fort somewhere out in the west, and he's given a mission. What he was told is that there was an Indian encampment on the western side of the Little Bighorn River, and the intel, the military information that they had, is that there were about 800 Indians in this encampment. And of those 800, something like 250 were braves. By that I mean men who were capable warriors. The rest of them were women, children, economists, scary people. So Custer's mission was to leave his fort and cross the Little Bighorn and literally capture these Indians and return them to the reservation. In a perfect world, there wouldn't have ever been a single shot fired. So Custer left his fort with 550 troopers in the 7th Cav. This was a staging area. They were well below the Indians, and they were on the east side of the river, so they couldn't be seen or heard. So Custer staged here on the night of 24 June. On the morning of 24 June 1876, he did this by plan. He left a captain named Benteen in the staging area with a few men, fresh horses, and more ammunition. Custer took 212 soldiers, and he moved due north, and first light on 25 June 1876, Custer crossed the Little Bighorn and turned south, and he had his executive officer, a major whose last name was Reno. Reno left the staging area at the same time, crossed the Little Bighorn and turned north. What you're looking at is military strategy. That's called a pincer movement. That's been used as far back that I know of as 2,000 years. We did that in the first Gulf War, when we beat the crap out of that idiot in Baghdad. So, first light on 25 June 1876, Custer and 212 troopers crossed the Little Bighorn and turned south. Reno and his men crossed the Little Bighorn and turned north. What they assumed was the river is a natural barrier to the east, so they can't escape that way. They could potentially, some of them could escape to the west, but they would be easy to sort of round up. So this mission was to grab these Indians, 800 of them, take them back to the reservation. Here we call that Pittman Hall. Yes, we call it Pittman Hall. So here's what happened. Reno's men crossed the Little Bighorn, they turned north, and the Indians saw them. They detected them quickly, and they engaged them. And after just 1 or 2 minutes, Reno's entire detachment turned tail and ran. They moved south. They disengaged. Now, here's something that's an unfortunate reality. Instead of 800 Indians with 250 warriors, we discovered after the battle was over, there was all sorts of physical evidence. We discovered after the battle was over, there were 2,200 warriors, and there were more than 4,000 Indians in the encampment. So now, all of these angry bees, Reno's no longer engaged. These 2,200 warriors who are well-equipped, trained, and ready to fight are now engaging 212 American troopers from the 7th Cav. Now, about half of these Indians had edged weapons. They had lances, hatchets, bows and arrows. The other half had repeating rifles, lever-action rifles. And back in this era, most rifles, there were exceptions to this, but most lever-action rifles were chambered for pistol cartridges, because that meant that somebody out west could have a gun belt with cartridges on it, and the cartridges would fit either the handgun or the long gun. So these lever-action carbines held 13, 14 rounds. Custer's troopers were carrying trapdoor Springfields. They were single-shot rifles. You literally lift the receiver open, push a metallic cartridge into the chamber, close the receiver, roll the hammer back, and shoot. So now, Custer's 212 men are over here. They're being engaged by 2,200 Indians. I paid attention in math class. That's about 11 to 1, right? And half of these 2,200 Indians have repeating rifles, and none of Custer's troopers do. Now, obviously, when the military went to get the bodies and bury them and do other things like that, they found that where the men were standing, there was an average of 3 shell casings on the ground. This battle was so fast, so furious, so intense, that these troopers only got off about 3 rounds each before the entire detachment was annihilated. Now, Captain Benteen is back here, but loved ones, there are no radios, there's no sat feed, there's no comm. He heard a little bit of gunfire, and then it broke off, and then he heard a little bit of gunfire for just a couple of minutes, and then it ceased. He has no earthly idea what's going on. So, at this point, Custer and his men are dead, all of them. Reno and his men have deserted, and Benteen doesn't have a clue. Now, as I put this on the whiteboard, this comes from a number of bright historians, John Gray and others, who study this thing intensely. This is a factual presentation of what happened at the Little Bighorn. Does that look like arrogance or stupidity? Not to me. It looks like bad intel and cowardice. In fact, Major Reno was taken to a courts-martial, and he was tried on cowardice and desertion in the face of the enemy. But the unfortunate thing was, Benteen had no idea what happened. All of Custer's men are dead. His people weren't going to rat on him because they were part of it as well, and the Indians didn't testify at the trial. So for lack of evidence, Major Reno was acquitted. But yet people talk about Custer's last stand as if George Armstrong Custer were an idiot, an arrogant fool, did all sorts of stupid things. Y'all, there's nothing glorious about war. I've ridden that pony. We make mistakes, but this was actually a well-conceived strategy, but it failed for 2 reasons. Benteen's cowardice, Reno's cowardice, and the fact that the Indians were literally, there were 10 times as many warriors as they anticipated. So, that's Custer's last stand. That's what happened to the 7th Cav on 25 June 1876. Now, I want to pull the projector back up and I'll tell you why. Excuse me, please. So now we're back at this line on the transparency. Hal Moore's 1st of the 7th Cav. Hal Moore was Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. He assumed command of the 1st Battalion, 7th Cav in 1963. Hal Moore vowed to himself that there would never be another Custer's last stand. He said, I'm going to make sure that my men, that I develop subordinate leaders so we never run into a problem like that. So the reason Hal Moore, this colonel in the Army, is significant is his regiment, 1st of the 7th, was the first regiment ever to train for and go to war using the air-mobile concept of warfare. In the early 60s, the Army adopted the air-mobile concept. We were going to do everything by helicopters. We were going to conduct visual reconnaissance over the area of operation. We would use them as aerial gun platforms. We would use them to insert troops, extract troops, resupply troops, medically evacuate them, reinforce them. We were going to use helicopters for everything. So it's a brand new concept of warfare. So, excuse me, Hal Moore's 1st of the 7th was at Fort Benning, Georgia, and the Army said, y'all have 18 months to train up and learn how to do this. So his folks would go out on these 3 and 4 day field training exercises probably every week as they tried to develop a mastery over these concepts of air mobile warfare. But since Hal Moore wanted to push down subordinate leaders, he wanted to create subordinate leaders everywhere, he had the most wonderful technique. For example, let's assume that, by the way, at full strength, the 1st of the 7th would have been about an 800-man unit. But let's assume, but it's broken down. The base unit is a platoon. The platoon, full strength, is about 45 soldiers. So let's assume that I'm a private. I'm a rifleman in one of the platoons in the 1st of the 7th Cav. And we're all sitting at Martin Army Airfield staging to go out on a field training exercise. And Colonel Moore walks up and he says to my platoon leader, he says, Lieutenant, for the purposes of this exercise, you're dead. Norton, private, rifleman, for the purposes of this exercise, you are the platoon leader. Everybody will respond to decisions you make for the next 3 or 4 days. And the real platoon leader won't say a word, but he'll make notes, and at the end of this exercise, he'll have a debrief. So we go out in the bush, we practice, we rehearse, I make mistakes, but I am the platoon leader for this exercise. And Moore did this on a regular basis. He would put people in leadership roles that didn't expect to be in leadership roles. And over the 18 months, not only did he develop relative mastery over these air mobile concepts of warfare, but he developed subordinate leaders at every level in the organization. So, the significance, I mean, Hal Moore has multiple significance. First, this is about 100 years after Custer's last stand. Second, first unit in the history of the United States Army to be trained in and go to war using the air mobile concept of warfare. So, Moore's unit deploys in 1965. In, I guess it would have been November of 1965, the 7th Cav fought a battle of the Idrang Valley. This lasted round the clock, 24 hours a day for 7 days. The Idrang is just a river in South Vietnam, and this battle was fought in the Idrang Valley. Now, Hal Moore's battle in the Idrang Valley has striking similarities to Custer's last stand. He had about 750 troopers on the ground, and he was up against 3 NVA regiments. That would have been about 3,300 well-equipped, well-trained, highly motivated soldiers. So they're looking at literally 4 to 1 in terms of strength, and the enemy knows the terrain, has a lot of advantages. And in the early stages of the battle, probably 60, 70 or more % of the small unit leaders were killed or wounded, the platoon sergeants and platoon leaders. And what that meant is that these units would have been leaderless, except Moore pushed down these leadership skills to every member of the unit. And sadly, over the course of the 7-day battle, about 250 of these 750 troopers died. But to a man, every single trooper that survived said, if Colonel Moore hadn't done that back at Benning, putting us in these leadership roles, developing our skills, he said none of us would have lasted 15 or 20 minutes. So Hal Moore is sort of the prototypically ideal way of developing subordinate leaders. You put people in the role. Leadership is a contact sport. Now, leadership development. There are a lot of ways to do it. In any organization, it requires the involvement of senior management. I'm looking at the top line of this transparency. Senior management has to develop a way to assess candidates, to select them, to develop them, to mentor them. Absolutely has to be a high level of involvement. Another thing that I've told you about on a couple of occasions, I talked about delegating, and I just talked about what Hal Moore did. Early immersion in leadership roles. There are so many easy ways to do that. What if I'm your big boss? I'm 2 levels up, and your direct supervisor says to me, you know, that kid over there, she is uncommonly promising. I think we should develop her. So what I'm going to instruct your direct supervisor to do is have you identify a challenge or task in your domain, wrap a team around it, and come back with a proposed solution. I don't care if you're in accounting or logistics or finance, marketing, it doesn't matter what you are. I'm going to say to you, okay, pick a problem in your domain, you pick team members to wrap around it, and in 6 or 8 weeks come back and identify the challenge clearly, tell us what resources you need, make several recommendations, and tell us which one you think is best and why. So my point is, you're talking about not even pulling people away from their work units. You can immerse people in leadership roles successfully and early. Broadening experiences typically mean that we put people in lateral situations. I mentioned General Electric a few moments ago. I've known for a number of years that GE has a lot of engineers, and the company has, I think, 4 divisions. They have a propulsion division, a lighting division, an appliance division, and a division that makes medical machines like imaging products, like MRI machines and stuff like that. So if GE hires a cadet engineer, somebody right out of a college of engineering, degree in hand but no experience and no professional certification, they will rotate them 6 months at a time through each of those 4 divisions. Can you imagine how powerful that is in terms of developing them? They've been in different products with different people, both as colleagues and as people who wrap around other activities and services. They're building this enormous network, and they're growing. So what GE does with its engineers, and there are plenty of other examples, they rotate each of the young engineers 6 months through each of the 4 major divisions. Now sometimes they may say, okay, bud, we need you to go over there because we have a critical need. Sometimes they may say, all right, you've completed the rotation, where would you like to start serving? And you get to pick. But the point is, that's just a good example of a broadening experience. Now, I fault myself for the next 2 lines. In my view today, now, we're not going to talk about either the military model or the competency model. I just think that I'm throwing a long ball. I'm putting too much information in today's presentation. So in terms of leader development, we're going to push away from that. But one thing I do want to talk about mentoring before we leave here. Mentoring is so powerful, I almost can't describe it. I beg you, each of you, when you join an organization, start to actively search for someone to mentor you. Mentoring is a relationship with 2 counterparties. There's a mentor and a protege. God love you, there's no mentor and mentee. That somebody made up that word and it's taken on a life of its own, and I can't stand it. If I ride in your car, am I the drivee? No, I'm a passenger. You don't just stick E's on the end of something and make up words. So the 2 counterparties in mentoring are mentor and protege. The mentor is someone senior in the organization, a lot of experiences, a lot of perspectives. The protege is someone junior, someone new. It's a fresh face, a new hire. And the mentoring relationship says that the mentor cheerfully, willingly invests in developing the protege. Now, mentoring comes in 2 forms. When I say 2 forms, there are 2 distinctly different models. Some companies have a formal mentoring model. When you join the organization, they'll assign somebody to be your mentor. That tends not to work well. The informal mentoring model means that you, over time, choose your mentors. And that tends to be so satisfying because you choose the mentor because you sense that there's some compatibility and some willingness for that person to contribute to your growth. And if I'm the mentor, I'm going to choose you if I think you're promising. If I think you're a slug that's self-important and deficient on many character things. I'm not going to invest a minute in it. So in informal mentoring, the mentors choose the proteges choose the mentors. It is so rewarding. I beg you, when you land anywhere, start to actively look for a mentor. Doesn't have to be in your unit, though it could. But if you have, my decision rules are compatibility and contribution. If I'm a new face in an organization and I meet you and I think that we are fundamentally compatible and that I think you have the potential to grow me, to develop me, then I'm going to reach out to you and say, you know, could I meet with you from time to time? You know, coffee here in the shop or maybe off campus or something like that. I know I'll have questions and I can't know what to. So again, please search out a mentor when you show up with boots on the ground somewhere. So I want to talk to you briefly about research streams. This comes out of the same book that Gary Uckel published about 15 years ago. All I've done is develop a simple framework where I categorize them based on the nature of the inquiry. Let me start with leader behaviors. I think this is incredibly valuable. And the reason it's valuable is fundamentally we know that if leaders do two things, if they literally have a good focus on task, if they can accomplish the mission that they're given, and if they show consideration for their people. If they're good at task behaviors and they're good at relational behaviors, they'll be effective leaders. So if we study leader behaviors and we discover that yours come up short, there are all sorts of interventions, training, that we can bring it up, whether it's a task problem or a relational problem. So this is powerful stuff. Situational moderators. A moderator variable is anything that has the potential to strengthen or weaken an outcome. The fact that you sit in college classrooms means that you realize that post-secondary education is an important moderator. If you get a college degree or advanced degrees, your lifetime earnings are going to go up by millions of dollars over you not seeking a post-secondary degree. So a moderator is anything that can strengthen or weaken an outcome. Now, the reason that this is important in leadership is I want you to think about this. What if I held one of you in high regard and I put you in a leadership role and you flourished? You just crushed it. You did everything that anyone could ask of you. Accomplished the mission, took care of your people, everything was fabulous. So, provably, you are an effective leader. So what if I'm your big boss and I take you and I lift you out of that situation and I plop you down in a new one? New task, new team, new resource set. Is it possible that you'll struggle or maybe even fail? It is. It is. So if we know how the situation moderates outcomes, that's important stuff to understand. Power and influence, really valuable. The reason it's valuable is you can't study leadership or enact leadership unless you know how to use power and how to influence people. Because that word is embedded in the definition. The definition of leadership is a process in which an individual intentionally influences others to accomplish a group task. So studying this is important. The last one, traits and skills, I don't think they belong together. Skills are powerful because they're transferable. We can teach you skills. We can't teach you traits. I can't teach you to be loyal or persistent or punctual or any other things that you and I would value. So on the skills side, I think it's really useful. I think to study traits is bogus because we can't transfer them. We are a bundle of them, you and I, but we have no way of teaching them. If we could successfully teach traits, we would have absolutely no societal ills. We'd have no drug problems, we'd have no prison populations, we'd have no delinquency, we'd have no spousal or child abuse. If we could teach traits, we would have no societal problems, but we can't. And that's the dilemma. So I think there's one more slide in the deck. And it turns out I'm right this time. I don't know if you can see the title, I hope you can. It says, yes, the camera suggests that you can. This is a synthesized model of leadership. I wanted to share this with you because this was actually the model of a leadership study that I hope to carry out at a Ford manufacturing plant in Louisville, Kentucky. And I got buy-in from the plant manager, I got buy-in from all the HR people, But then I had to take it to the union. I met with the union people twice, and they just weren't willing to do it. End of discussion. And I said, you know, we spent 4 hours together. Tell me why. And they said, well, we think you're a deputy dog. You're going to find something and report it back to management. They're going to make us work on it. So no, you can't do the study. So here's what I was going to do. I pitched this to plant management and to the senior HR people. They have about 320 work teams at this facility, the Kentucky truck plant. And each of these 320 teams has a team lead, has a group of collaborators, and it has a series of group tasks. This may be the paint shop, they may do powertrain, they may put the interior in the truck. But the point is, there are good measures for leader skills and leader behaviors. We're going to get measures of those on each of the team leads. For each of the 320 teams, there are good measures for cohesion and group potency. Again, we would gather measures on those teams. The group task would be different across the teams, but my memory is that each team had 5 metrics. Productivity, quality, cost, safety, gosh, I can't remember the 5th one. But for every team, there were 5 measures that they reported on every week. So I had output measures for the group task. And then I would have got some sophistication to see how the situation differs, and I don't yet know what that means, because I couldn't carry the study out. But if you look at this model, you'll see that 3 of the variables come from Euclid's definition of leadership. An individual who intentionally influences a group of collaborators to accomplish a group task. So I proposed the study. Sadly, I wasn't able to carry it forward, but this is how people like me study leadership. And I just wanted to give you that picture. So in terms of what I wanted to share with you today, we're done. The one thing I do want to do is I want to ask you the question, which would validate your viewing of this session. In American history, what event happened on 25 June 1876? Send me a note. Love you. I'll see you soon. Bye.